Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jeff Greenbaum. I'm the chair of the International Advertising Association's Public Policy Council, and I'm here today talking with Tracy Jaw from Unicef about some advertising issues that are of great interest to the IAA and to the community at large. This is IAA's first fireside chat of the year. We do a series of programming. The Public Policy Council does different types of programming during the course of the year to talk about important emerging advertising issues that affect marketers globally. We do a series of fireside chats with thought leaders about emerging issues, as well as a series of panel discussions on the intersection between advertising regulation and the ways in which advertising regulation can impact the way we create community, the way we create economies that allow brands to thrive. And I'll tell you more about what's upcoming tomorrow on that front. So I am here because I wear a bunch of different hats. One of them is my role at the Public Policy Council. I'm also chairman of the Global Advertising Lawyers Alliance, which is an alliance of advertising lawyers around the world. And one of the things that GALA does is help drive some of the IAA agenda, thinking about these kinds of emerging advertising issues. And finally, I'm an advertising lawyer at Frankfurt Kernan in New York. It's my day job as well. But what I'm really excited to do is to talk with Tracy. So Tracy is a senior gender advisor at Unicef, and Unicef sort of in the second half of last year released a very interesting report called "Promoting Diversity and Inclusion in Advertising: A Unicef Playbook." I actually, in very earth-friendly way, I actually printed it out and I have it here because I think it's so interesting and there's so much to talk about. So I actually have it here sitting on my desk. And what we're going to do today is to talk to Tracy about the playbook, about UNICEF's role in the way it's thinking about the advertising ecosystem and the ways in which advertisers can be a force for social good in the advertising space, particularly as it relates to children. So with that introduction, first of all, Tracy, thanks for being here. It's a strange time. Here we are going into 2 years in our weird remote locations doing what we're doing, though you're in the office, as you seem to always be in the office. And but what I would love to do before we get into the report is kind of take a step back and first of all, talk a little bit about UNICEF. What's UNICEF's mission? What's its role? How did UNICEF get to the point where it's publishing guidelines about advertising?
So thank you so much, Jeffrey, and it's a wonderful way to begin my middle of the week to be having this conversation with you and on my favorite topic, which is how do we promote a more diverse and equal world, especially for children. So speaking about UNICEF, I mean UNICEF has it's a UN agency. We are 75 years old. We're just actually celebrating our 75th year, and we work for children around the world. So our mandate is really looking at the children from 0 to 18. And in that age group, we look at children, all the needs that children could have, health, nutrition, making sure there is access to water and sanitation in communities, education. That's a big role that UNICEF plays in across several countries. We are also the largest deliverer of vaccines in the world for children, so childhood vaccinations. I mean, anything that you can think of. And so within that, overall work that we do, whether it's on health, nutrition, water, sanitation, making sure that we have social policies that are supporting children and caregivers. So just like we look at looking at adults who are involved in taking care of children. So within that overall framework, we are also committed to making sure that the access to services is equal and that we're promoting a more equitable world for children, which is where my role comes in as a gender advisor to really looking to look at the gender-based differences between children and how do we make sure that we are promoting a more equal world for the next generation.
And you really see advertising as playing an important role in thinking about these issues.
Absolutely. I mean, I think broadly we see the private sector broadly, and within that, advertising, sector specifically playing a really important role. I mean, I think over the last few years, I would say UNICEF has really kind of strengthened our position around how do we partner with the private sector, and we have this framework called what we call the business for results. But essentially, what that means is that we see private sector having a huge impact on the world around us. I mean, right now, when you think of, and I know I had the statistic at the back of my hand, but if you look at the top 100 biggest economies in the world, 40 of them are actually companies. So when you're thinking about actually having an impact on the lives of children, who we want to be working with, we want to be working with national governments, but we also want to be working with companies. And within that, when you specifically hone in on how is it that companies are actually taking their message to the world, advertising plays a big role. And I think that's where that's why we are here, to talk about the how advertising can be a force for good, and
Well,
especially for children.
it's such an interesting insight, right? And we've certainly seen that, in the U.S. as you think about, as governments go from more or less progressive, as often companies, big companies, progressive companies are the ones that are driving social change and often are ahead of where government laws are in terms of moving things forward. So it's very interesting to think about the importance of, companies as the sort of a building block or the experimentation stage, right? If you think of, I don't know, we're heading in a different direction, but right? You thought of, even like the federal, like even like federalism, like this, the idea of a state system where individual states can experiment with laws and then they sort of get broader. It's almost like in many ways, companies can push these issues forward and then they get adopted more broadly. And so it's so interesting to hear how you think about the importance of engaging with the business audience, because IA really is a big believer in this whole collaboration piece. Right? This notion that the more collaboration there is between the various stakeholders, the more information that's shared, the better we're going to be able to address these issues. And in fact, this report is the product of a very close collaboration with Lego.
Absolutely. And I would really like to thank that partnership, because I would say about a year and a half ago, we started having conversations with the Lego group, and they were in on a similar path as us, trying to think about diversity and inclusion. And I think all of us were very moved by what happened in the US in the June of 2020, and the Black Lives Matter movement. And it sort of propelled us to really thinking about, what can we do to make change in this world and in our own organization. So UNICEF was also, like with a lot of other organizations, thinking internally about how do we create this culture of change. And we already have a lot of work that we do on gender equality in through our programs, but we're also looking internally. And I think Lego was at a similar stage where they were also starting to think about, okay, what can we do as a company to really contribute to making a difference in this world, propelled by the Black Lives Matter movement. And so we started having this conversation, and there's been a long partnership now with them over the last 18 months. And this playbook is something that we're very proud of. It has come out as a product of that partnership. We did want to produce something that is relevant and usable to everyone who works in the sector, and especially companies that work with children. I mean, that is the fundamental age when children start learning about all different forms of identities. And what better time to create social change than in early childhood?
Absolutely makes so sense. So jumping into the report, I mean, what you sort of the report begins with, and I think it's helpful for us to begin this discussion a little bit with the way that UNICEF sort of thinks about its own framework in terms of, you're not starting from scratch here. You have some basic principles that you approach these problems with, and the first is really the best interest of the child. So can you talk a little bit about what are the frameworks where the lens which you're thinking about these problems? And I'm really thinking about both the Convention on the Rights of the Child, as well as sort of your own sort of children's principles that you sort of use to sort of as the basis for beginning to think about these problems.
Right. So I mean, as a UN agency, we are committed to certain fundamental conventions that have, that are kind of our founding principles. So, in a private sector, what you would consider as your core principles. And so, for us, those are the human rights framework. So, the Convention on the Right of the Child. We have also the CEDAW, which is a convention on the elimination of discrimination against women. We have CRPD, which is eliminates discrimination against people with disability. Also racial discrimination. So we have a number of kind of what we call the core human rights frameworks, but very pertinent to UNICEF and to this particular project, where we thought the most relevant piece is of course what is the underlying principle or the core principle of the current Sustainable Development Goals, which is leaving no one behind. So when we apply that lens of we don't want to leave anyone behind, it's not just addressing gender equality as it happens, but it's really looking at even within, say, girls and women, who are the ones who are most left behind. So what that forces you to do is to apply this multiple lenses, and you'll see that in the playbook, and I'm sure we'll talk about it. Is that okay? We look at gender and race and disability. So looking at these multiple intersecting forms of discrimination, and that's what the core of the leaving no one behind principle is. That who are the people who are most left behind? How do we identify them, and how do we get to them? The second sort of principle where we're coming from is, of course, the child rights and business principles. And UNICEF, along with Save the Children, we, and the UN Global Compact, we came up with the child rights and business principles. And within that, there's a very specific call out to the role that marketing and advertising and media broadly plays. And what is responsible marketing? How do we market responsibly to children? What does it entail? So that was, I mean, those are sort of our core overarching principles, and of course, the principle of non-discrimination, right? So we want to make sure that we are being completely fair and equal in how we work with children and engage with the world.
So, so the report itself really looks at the role of advertising through the depiction or through the way it deals with four core issues. And I think one of the things that's I think really interesting about the report is you kind of don't assume that the business community around the world understands it. Like you really go in and you spend some time saying, look, when we're talking about gender, this is what we're thinking about. And so I think it's interesting to spend a little bit of time, in the way that you are educating marketers, the book, to sort of talk a little about that. And so maybe we could talk about the first principle a little bit. What do you, when you're thinking about gender in this report, what are the issues you're thinking about?
So when we're thinking about gender, I mean, and maybe I'll just take a step back, just I'm not sure if everybody has taken a look at the playbook or has a hard copy of it, but we had and we were looking at the different lenses through which we could approach this whole issue of stereotypes, right? And again, going back to where UNICEF is coming from, the reason why we care about stereotypes is because we feel that when you promote stereotypes, or when consciously or unconsciously, when there are stereotypes in content that's being shown to children and their caregivers, that leads to unequal outcomes. And how do you identify stereotypes? Stereotypes could come from they could be gender stereotypes, they could be racial stereotypes, they could be ethnic stereotypes, and we all know it, we all cringe when we see it, and then we're like, okay, that was something that was not quite right about what was going on over there. And some people do it, but they don't get the message right, and that makes it even more cringeworthy. So when we're thinking about gender, right, so what is gender, like, and we, for us at UNICEF, we're like, okay, gender is something that defines who you are in terms of a girl, boy, and everything that's in between, right? So multiple, all different genders, and we really started breaking down, okay, what are the ways in which gender-related stereotypes play out in the world, and how do they then affect the outcomes, unequal outcomes for children. So making that leap from defining what is gender, what are gender related stereotypes. And so we really like the playbook really joins those dots. It defines what is an issue, so defines what is gender, what are gender related stereotypes, and then how do they play out, and how do they lead to unequal outcomes for for children. So what you may think is completely harmless, oh, we're just showing girls making whatever, like painting, while there was a recent advertisement that somebody's forwarded to me, and they're like, oh well, it's getting a lot of press, and it just said very harmless, it just showed little girls painting in the house. But why is that problematic when you see her brother is running around breaking furniture and doing something, And it's like, yeah, it is problematic because you're essentially stereotyping girls and boys in very specific roles that we have been used to seeing for so many years. And it might seem completely harmless because we also normalize into thinking that. But these are the kind of stereotypes. This is what children, this is how children learn. I mean, this is the content that they see day in and day out. And we all know how much time kids are spending on media and television. This is how they're learning it. And it leads to lifelong differences that you see. Next thing you know, you're in your 30s and you say, oh, well, why don't we have enough women in architecture or as engineers? Well, we needed to have started much earlier than trying to get to gender parity when you're 45. Then, it's much easier. And we do the same thing for race, and we do the same thing for disability, and for family types, and how important each of these categories are.
And in the gender space, you sort of, one of the things you talk about is gender equal representation, right? So is the idea here that, you don't, instead of showing the two girls painting, and the boys running around, show a girl and a boy painting and a girl and a boy running
Yeah,
around. The idea
absolutely.
is right. But what if, does this mean that a marketer can't market a product to girls? Like, what if they want? I mean, how do you think about this in a framework of, you know, you know, I mean, is the answer that no, there's no product that's for girls and there's no product for boys, or is it okay for a marketer to say, look, this product, well, it's fine, anyone can play with it. Our main target audience here is girls, and we want to advertise to them. How do you think about that issue in the context of
I
gender equal
mean, I
representation?
think that I think you're answering the question. I think it is. I mean, if the product is something that, I mean, truly, and this is something that which again, like we learned so much from our partnership with Lego, and this is that and their commitment to actually not have products that are, they made a commitment to not have products that are marketed separately to girls and boys. And I think that's exactly what we think. Unless there is something about the product that has something to do with your biologically being a girl, there is no reason for it to be marketed separately. I mean, what we enter into this whole thing of pink washing, right? And oh, these are investments that are better for women. No, they're not. There's nothing about this particular investment that's better for women, unless you're assuming that a woman, that you need like breasts to be doing this or something, but it's not. I mean, it's really is not, So I mean, that's what we say. It's you, unless and until it is something, there is some biological reason why a particular product is being made to address a biological need of a particular sex, there is no reason for it to be marketed specifically to girls and boys differently. Definitely when it comes to toys, right? I mean, there is no distinction in how a girl plays and how a boy plays. They are socialized into playing in certain ways.
So the second big category, and you sort of group together race, ethnicity, and culture, and you
Mhm.
talk about how sort of you know the ways in which race, ethnicity, and culture are treated, is really dehumanizing through the use of stereotypes. Can you talk a little bit about what the issues are you're thinking about there?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that that for us, and I have to say that it was a real learning experience for me as well, because I mean I worked in the gender space, and we always and so often we get mixed up in what we consider as the racial stereotype versus ethnic versus religious versus cultural, and just going through the different workshops that we had internally, we really broke down, like, okay, what is race firstly, and what is ethnicity, how is ethnicity different from culture, and how does religion kind of manifest itself through ethnicity and culture, and all the different ways in which the stereotypes relating to race, ethnicity, and culture are actually intertwined, right? So you will see a racial stereotype about curly hair, for instance, but as it so happens that curly hair is also associated with an ethnic stereotype belonging to people from a certain continent, or you have a racial stereotype about skin color, and again we know that it is people of African descent, or these are people from East Asia. So they are very intertwined, and we really needed to break it down, and it was really hard. It was not an easy one to say, oh, okay, we don't want to that it's what is cultural cannot be ethnic, and what is ethnic cannot be racial. It's actually very intertwined. But what we really needed to say is that each one of these categorizations is actually I mean, it's as you're saying, it's a dehumanizing, because it does not recognize. I mean, it's essentially breaking up people into certain kind of groups, which there is no biological reason for that to exist. It is coming from our mindsets. It's the way that we are raised, and it doesn't mean that if there is someone who has a certain strong ethnic or cultural identity, you don't respect it. It's just that you don't come from the lens where you're stereotyping that, a person belonging to X religion or X community is going to be smarter, or that, people, I think that in the book we use certain stereotypes like, all British kids can write good English. That's not true, and that's a stereotype that's just as harmful as saying that, all, black kids are not good at maths. I mean, it is dehumanizing at a very fundamental level.
And then the third issue you deal with, which it seems like maybe in some ways is the unseen issue in some of these conversations. It seems like was the issue of disability, both in terms of just lack of inclusion in advertising, but also thinking about disability through a very narrow lens.
Yes, exactly. And I think UNICEF is one of those, few agencies where we have a really strong and quite a large team that works on disability, and we have colleagues who are experts in this area. And again, I'm no expert in working on disability. I don't claim to be one, but for me as well, it was a really a learning experience that, sometimes what we think is supposed to be a positive portrayal just ends up is just wrong, in the sense, like, where we tend to show disabled people as being heroes, and it's actually, has a reverse effect. So what we're again trying to move towards is, how do you normalize disability? How do you just recognize them for having different skills and different ability, and not really excluding them or showing them in it's the equivalent in the gender space of showing women as being superheroes or something, and I think it's just that we're trying to say, okay, no, it's completely normal to have certain forms or be differently abled.
I think one of the challenges that you talked about in terms of being more inclusive on the disability front was unseen disabilities. Do you have some thoughts about the ways in which you can go beyond just showing a wheelchair? I mean, how do you address the different kinds of disabilities that people have that may not be
Yeah.
obvious?
I mean, there were some really good examples that I'm sure we'll come to, is that, where you had where there's a doll line which actually shows different people with and it's not unseen, but it's just something that is not as obvious as having a wheelchair or a white cane, right?
Sure.
Where somebody with the skin pigmentation issue, or somebody with the with a hearing loss, which you don't really see it, and they might be wearing hearing aid, and to just not it's not something that is very obvious, but it affects so many people in the world, and most of the disability is actually not something that is visible. A lot of it is actually something which we don't even recognize. When you and I are talking, we may not even recognize it. And I've seen people starting to mention it in their signatures, or in how they sign out that they might need assistive technology and things like that. But I think it's just about creating an awareness that most of the disabilities actually things that we're not even aware of, like, and especially with children, when it comes to how it impacts their learning, and being able to identify it early on in their lives. I mean, exactly. I think that's where we're coming from. It gets really hard when you get into the advertising space to talk about the unseen disability,
Yeah.
right?
But
Yeah.
I guess there are clues. I guess a good example is the hearing aid, right? I'm just sitting and I'm thinking I can't think of an ad that I've ever seen where someone's wearing a hearing aid. I mean, I may be in a hearing aid ad,
Hmm.
but it's interesting to think about that issue. Um, and then the fourth topic, the sort of fourth lens that you're looking at
Hmm.
this through is sort of family and caregivers. And what was encompassed in your sort of family and caregivers category?
So I mean, this goes to what we were thinking about when we think about the differences in children, right? So a lot of the differences in children are what we just talked about, the most obvious ones: the gender, the disability, the age, the ethnicity. But we also have children who live in different types of families, and so that's where we identified family types as one big category, because there are so many types of families. And what you see in the advertising world, and a lot of advertising, is very often the very stereotypical. There is usually a heterosexual couple, male female, with the two kids, and the homes look very similar. You have your homes, they're standalone single family homes. You have your dog or your pet, and we were just trying to say that, but actually majority of the world is not like that. I mean, you look at, that's a certain part of the world, of course, is like that. But um, when we start to show that, in all of our advertising and the content that we are putting out there, it sort of becomes the aspirational thing that we're trying to market to the rest of the world. But actually, what we know what works, and I mean, you're in advertising and you know what works, is when people are able to see themselves in that. And I think especially with kids, and we did some surveys when we started off working on this area in 2018 with young people, and I think the number one thing that they are looking for, when young kids who responded to the survey, they said they would be looking to see where they can see themselves in certain kind of advertising. They would like to see themselves represented. And so when you're thinking about the family type, and you look at the diversity in the family that exists in the real world, with single mothers and single fathers and grandparents and caregivers, and not necessarily parents, and multi-generational families, and you have the same sex families. There's so much diversity in families, and so to really be able to show that diversity, and I think that's an area that I see there is quite a lot of progress that I'm seeing in the advertising world. I think definitely in this part of the world, where you're seeing quite a lot of differences in the families, in the kind of homes that they live in, who's part of the family, all of that.
And did you, I mean, being an international organization that is talking to, you know, however many countries there are around the world, with very different cultures and religions and history and progressivism and beliefs, and uh, how do you, I mean, this is a very progressive report, pushing forward, diversity. And what was there, did you have any hesitation in saying, this is just not going to play well in these countries, or this is
Mhm.
not going to, I mean, how do you deal with trying to, do the right thing, but at the same time ensure that your message is something that people are in a place that they can hear?
Right. And I think this is why it was really important for us to answer your question. It was very important for us to base it in the human rights frameworks. So going back to the principles that we have of child rights and the CRC and the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the child rights and business principles. I mean, those principles are quite unapologetic about what is it what is the world that we would like to see for children. And we would like to see a fair and equal world. We would like to see a world that is where their children face no discrimination based on their skin, their gender, their race, their ethnicity. And I think that's sort of where we're coming from, is that as a UN agency, we can say that this is where aspirationally we would like to be. And I think what the playbook does, and is that is there needs to be a very clear recognition that yes, these are the principles that we would like to be, right? So you recognize that we're not all at the same starting point. We're all at different places. All the countries, communities, neighborhoods, we're all in different places, individuals. But we have to recognize that we're part of a journey. But aspirationally, where we're trying to be is a more fair and equal world. And the same thing applies to companies, whether companies that are involved in marketing and advertising, and companies that are actually developing products, is that recognizing that you're somewhere along that journey, but where you're trying to be is to be truly diverse and representational in your content. Yeah.
But, but before we leave this topic, I didn't want to lose the issue of intersectionality, which is that, and you sort of talked about the importance of not thinking about each of these four categories as separate, but sort of seeing the fact that they exist together.
Right. And I think the report does a really good job of explaining this. But you can essentially think that for any individual, I mean, you and me, we can think of so many different categories that can define us, right? So I'm a woman of a certain age, belonging to a certain country, with a certain skin color, certain ethnic identity, right? Um, what you can think about is that I could face discrimination based on any one of these categories. But when you actually bring it all together, you bring all the lenses together. That's what you call that compounded intersection leads to almost a compounded form of discrimination. And that's what is intersectionality, that you look at every individual and you look at all the different arrows through which you could describe them. So age, gender, sex, race, ethnicity, religion, and you put all these different lenses together. I mean, you can almost think of yourself as a stage with all the lights that are pointing towards you. And when you add it all together, the light is much brighter. So essentially, applying that intersectional lens is saying that when you put all these lenses together, say a Black disabled woman is going to face a compounded form of discrimination that, um, say a white woman would face. Because what we're saying is that there are there is that kind of compound effect that these intersecting forms of discrimination have, and it's very important for us to recognize that. And this is what speaks to the principle of leaving no one behind. So when we are looking at when we really want to leave no one behind, we want to apply all those different lenses through which we can look at individuals and identify those individuals who are most left behind in any community. And how do we actually make sure that whatever systems we are putting in place, whatever policies, whatever laws, whatever services we are delivering, we want to make sure that that last individual who's facing these compounded forms of discrimination is also included in conversations and any kind of development.
And so you talk about this whole aspirational journey that people are on, and the playbook says in order to really begin this journey, you have to kind of do an analysis of where you are, and you sort of set up this framework of being discriminatory, being aware, and then being transformative. And you have to kind of understand where you are at this moment, what your advertising looks like, and then figure out how to sort of make your way down that path. Can you talk about each of the phases and sort of how advertisers should think about where they are and evaluate where they are in this journey?
Right. So where we came from. So in the gender space, for those of us who work on gender, we have something called the gender continuum that actually goes from that you could take any specific intervention and you could classify yourself that particular intervention as either being discriminatory or being transformative. So, and along the way, you have discriminatory, so you're deliberately causing harm, actually. And whether it's deliberate or not, but you are causing harm by doing something. Then you are blind, which is that you don't actually recognize that there is a difference between men and women. And then you go to a place where you're transformative, where you're trying to actually shift the reasons why these inequalities exist. So what we did was that we simplified this model, and we had this three-step essentially that you've talked about, which is in the playbook, which I think companies can apply as they are thinking about diversity and inclusion and their journey along the way. And I think this thinking really came from a point where, we see, I mean, in the last few years, that there's a lot of companies that are taking steps in the right direction and that are trying to be diverse in the content that they're producing and what they're putting out there, and they face backlash. And I think what we were trying to say is that, we need to be a little bit more open about, we have to recognize that we're not all in the same place, and this is a journey, and there is going to be points at which you are not going to get your message right and you're not going to get your content right, but recognizing where you're in this space is going to help you think about, okay, this is where I want to be, which is to be truly transformative. Because I do believe, I think that in most cases, no, you're not deliberately trying to put content out there that's going to be discriminatory. I think in most cases, I think in some cases it may be, but in most cases you're not going to be. So recognizing that for us, transformative advertising or transformative product development means X, and recognizing where you're in that journey is really important. So, a discriminatory kind of from a gender space, a discriminatory one is something, as you're saying, you would market separately to girls and boys. So you would show women coming back from work and rushing to the kitchen to prepare dinner for her kids that night, whereas the man strolls in and joins the kids for dinner. That's discriminatory. That is very discriminatory in what you're depicting. um, Something that is aware, and I think this is where the distinction actually gets harder, is between what is aware and being what is transformative. So the three steps are discriminatory, aware, and transformative. An aware one would be where you say, okay, we recognize that women and men have differences, they play different roles, we want to be trying to show more equal depiction, but what you're doing is really not um, it's not really transformational. Like, you all you do is, like, say, show role reversal. Right? And
You
so,
mean
and
so you have
yeah,
one commercial where the woman's making dinner and one
exactly.
commercial where the man's making dinner?
Yeah, exactly. Or that, you do a one-off thing and you say, okay, well, great, just look at us. We are like we're the example of diversity because we've got this one commercial out there. That's not really transformative, because what we think transformative is, to be transformative, you have to think beyond that one commercial, that one product, that one thing. It is something that requires an entire organizational level approach, that you are thinking that my company or my firm as an organization is going to be a force for positive change in this world, right? And I am committed to doing that. And I think this goes to the starting point for this conversation. Why is UNICEF in this space? Because we care about making social change, and we think that did I just get lost?
You lost, but I figured you would be back, and now you're back.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure what happened over there. No, so I was saying, I think for us, we really think that private sector companies are part of that larger conversation. So I think for every company to actually recognize that, what does it mean for them to be a force for social change in this world? So how can an advertising company be a force for social change? It's, and I've seen companies doing this, and I've seen some really good examples, and the playbook gives these examples where it starts with, even like product design, and then how it gets marketed, and really connecting it with social issues. And there's some really good examples out there of companies that have tried to do this. And so I think it's very important to, that the starting point is to see where is it that aspirationally you're trying to be, and is your aspiration to, you know to just be recognized that, okay, look, I'm doing DNI and do the tokenistic thing, or do you really see yourself as being part of the social change? And I think, and that's why I think for us, we are always open to talking to companies, and we welcome conversation with companies that are looking to do social, to be part of that social change.
And so when you think of an advertiser that's at the transformative space, this is a company who has incorporated diversity consistently throughout their advertising communications,
Mhm.
not just in kind of a tokenistic way, and really showing that sort of that the diverse aspects of all of the various forms of life in a way that's just completely integrated in the advertising in a way that's seamless.
Right. And that diversity would also have to be internal, right? So we go through the five steps that we think advertisers can be making. And one of those important steps is to look internally, to look at your creative teams, because we know having diverse voices, and we have some good examples in the book, which with Pixar and Netflix, where they actually started off by not necessarily by looking at the content which is out there, but looking internally first and making sure that you have diverse teams, and then you focus on the content. So I think, but it's really important for us to have, to be truly transformational, you need to have both the internal and the external.
And the Netflix research shows that there was actually a correlation between
Exactly.
a more diverse team and producing more diverse content.
Absolutely. Because,
So,
it isn't that, I would say that, from your experience, Jeff, that would be, I would expect that, right? People, when you bring on board a more diverse team, people are also going to be showing their stories and where they're coming from and the different place that they come from. So they actually bring that richness to the content.
and so, maybe to oversimplify a little bit, on this journey, kind of the playbook basically says, look, if you want to be transformative, you got to take a couple key steps. And first is you build your diversity into the creative process. You have to have a diverse team. Then second is you've really got to track your progress and see, are you really doing these things?
Mhm.
Because otherwise, it's not going to actually lead to real change.
Right, right. And what we also say is, once you've done that kind of, that internal stock take, is also then investing a little bit of time in coming up with those guidelines that apply to your particular company, right? So what we have is like, the generic definitions of gender and race, and but the way that it applies to specific companies and specific sectors, and to specific content developers is going to be different. So, and this goes to this point we were talking about, there's so much differences in the world depending on which market, which country you're operating in. There may be certain kinds of forms of identities that would be more important in that context that this playbook has not looked at. Like, for instance, I think we were very deliberate in not looking at religion, and we sort of put in religion under the ethnic and the cultural umbrella, but also because as again, coming from the UN space, we don't necessarily distinguish on the basis of religion. We recognize that religious groups are important, and we work with them as force for change, and a lot of we do work a lot with religious leaders in terms of changing, say, social practices and things like that. But as a form of identity, we don't really look at religion as a form of discrimination. It's part of, we that's why we clubbed it together with ethnicity and with cultural, the way that it gets represented, the way that religion then depicts itself in the way people dress or eat or behave.
One of the things that's interesting in the examples you gave is and the examples are very, very interesting, and people should definitely check out their report and look at the examples and look at it. But one of the things that's interesting about the examples are more focused really on product development than they are on marketing of products. And it shows the evolution of the way that companies sort of thought about product design. And I mean, I assume that part of this is obviously the products themselves are extraordinarily influential to kids too, but presumably also more inclusive product design will lead naturally to more inclusive product advertising. And it seems one good example of that is you give two examples of two different dolls. You talked about the evolution of Barbie, and maybe we could talk about the evolution of Barbie a little bit.
Yeah. No, I think, and it's really interesting. We actually did have a follow-up conversation with the team that's been working on this, and it's fascinating because, I have to say that, as a mother of a daughter, I was never in favor of Barbies, but I've been just amazed at the kind of changes and very conscious approach that they have taken towards uh, depicting the sheer diversity in the types of Barbies that are available now. I mean, I forget the number, it was like 100 plus types of identities and clothes and professions that the Barbie is involved in, which is amazing. I mean, I'm not saying that it's perfect and that everyone should run out and go and buy one, but I'm just saying that I think again that going back to this analogy of the journey, it's amazing the journey that Barbie has been on. I mean, going back to where it started and where it's come. And I feel that a lot of it um, has come both from an internal kind of stock take within the developers, but also from what people are demanding, right? I mean, and this goes to the point where kids want to see themselves being represented in the toys, and one form of just having that one form was not enough.
And is this just a made up memory from my childhood? You can tell me this is made up, but am I remembering this correctly? That in my crayon box, there was one crayon called Flesh Color.
Exactly, that's it. And
Yeah,
Crayola now, and they have this entire, which was in 2020, they came up with this whole range, and it's amazing. I mean, this whole box of flesh-colored crayons. I mean, it's is, and we see that around the world, and I think that that's where this the optimism that I do think companies are becoming more aware. I do think they're taking cognizance of the fact that this is what people want, and you look at. I remember going to buy makeup and not finding the right make foundation shade. And now you go out there and you have every skin tone represented. I mean, Crayola has done an amazing job with this box of flesh-colored crayons.
yeah,
It's
incredible.
it's yeah.
One of the things the examples also highlights is not only kind of diverse representation, but also taking into account disability in product design.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think this is where there's some companies that have done amazing work, right? I would say the work that Lego has been doing, I think, with their breed friendly, containers, as well as the entire range that they have that's available, for children. We also have I forget the example, but from Microsoft, you have the assistive keyboard that they have developed. And I think so. I think that there are some companies that have done amazing work that we have recognized in this space. But I think there it's a little bit harder. It was, I have to say, it was hard for us to come up with really good examples of companies that have developed products and have shown positive examples of kids with disability in their marketing. I
Yeah.
think companies are doing it, but not enough.
And one of the other, I think, sort of points you make in the examples is this isn't niche marketing. This isn't
Mhm.
something you have to do. It is actually something that has been shown to be an ingredient to. It's not only better for the world, but it will actually lead to success. And you have a whole section talking about Dora the Explorer. And anybody who has kids, is perfectly familiar with Dora the Explorer. Maybe way too familiar with Dora the Explorer, right? And the backpack or whatever it was. And maybe you could talk a little bit about sort of what that represents.
Yeah. I mean, I think what we were trying to say is that this is, as you said, this is not just marketing for one particular market segment. When you think about the forms of diversity that we're talking about, gender, I mean, that's half the world. You cannot be talking about, you know, and we're not just talking about, different forms of sexual orientation and gender identities. Even if you look at that, that's a huge segment. So it is not a niche marketing anymore. It's and I think, I mean, again, kudos to Barbie, because they actually do show, like dolls that fall, which are not just necessarily, you know the traditional depiction of girls. I mean, I think it's amazing. So it's not, you're not just selling to that one kid who represent, who is from that one particular group. It is, as you say, Dora the Explorer, everyone knows about it. It's not just for, kids who are from a certain, ethnic group. So in that sense, I mean, I think what we were trying to, our vision essentially was that, marketing, advertising, product, and I think, you are absolutely right. I think the journey for the advertising and marketing begins with diverse products, right? If you're just having diversity in your marketing, but your products themselves are highly differentiated, then that's not really going to end up with very diverse marketing. So but it's really, for us, the vision is that that product, the marketing, the advertising should represent the diversity around the world. It should be as diverse, because that's when you realize that it's not looking at small niche market segments and marketing to them. There's a huge market out there for a lot of products that you think just belong to that one particular community. I mean, you look at the success of, Asian food, or, like, people are interested, and it's not just one particular community that you're marketing for.
And so, what was the response to the report?
I mean, we've had really positive response. I mean, I forget, I mean, my team will probably have the metrics of how many times it's been downloaded and all that. But, we've had companies who have reached out to us, companies, of course, who were happy to be featured as good examples. I think so. That was really nice. And I think I'm really happy that it has spurred a conversation. We presented at the New York Ad Week, along with the Lego Group, continues to be our partner. We're also working very closely with the Gina Davis Institute, because, they are also a thought leader in this particular space. We have close alliances with the Licensing International. So many partners, with UN Women, that leads the Unstereotype Alliance. So this is another global alliance that's addressing stereotypes in marketing and advertising from a gendered lens. So we've had really good response. What we would really hope to see is to have companies, step forward, and we would encourage research guidance that you're developing, and continue to work with similar kind of companies in this space.
And what's next? Like, what do you see as the next big project?
I mean, I would say that, for us, the playbook was a big milestone, and I would like to continue to see that. And I think for us, the next big thing would be, besides just making sure that that this playbook gets used, is actually seeing it being applied in specific companies, and especially big ones. I would love to see, some of the biggest companies that work with children, and also with advertising companies, who would like to work with us to see how this playbook can be actioned internally in that particular space. So that would be amazing. I think we would also. I mean, I would love to see at a more of a global level, more. I mean, we don't really talk about regulation, or self-regulation, though. Although, there are countries that have enforced it, but I think the playbook is really coming from a space of, when we are talking about this the three-step approach, transformational, we are really moving towards a space where we're saying, okay, regulation can help with certain form of change, but in order to be transformational, there needs to be a lot more about of the self reflection. And the only way a company can do that is if you have that internal stock take audit and approach internally. And so, I think as UNICEF, we would be very happy to see, that kind of reflection taking place in a number of companies.
Wow. Well, I'm sure this incredible playbook is going to lead to that. The tomorrow, for those of you watching, tomorrow at 9 a.m., we are doing a panel discussion on evolving self-regulation practices around the world, featuring leaders of self-regulatory systems from India, the UK, France, United States, Australia, and Belgium. So that should be a very, very interesting conversation to talk about sort of the ways in which self-regulation, the role that self-regulation is playing in this ecosystem. But anyway, Tracy, thank you so much. This was such an interesting conversation. and I really enjoyed hearing all about it. So thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
All right, take care.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.